Hey everybody, it's Elon from Inside Fighting, and there is one specific genre of martial arts that I've been told to cover many times now from many people, and so today's the day. So stay tuned because this video is on HEMA.
Pow pow, inside fighting, yeah, dangerous martial arts. Pow pow, ooh ah.
All right, so before I get going on this video, if you want to support the channel, you can go to InsideFightingStore.com. That website is InsideFightingStore.com, or you can just like, subscribe, and comment and share the video. That means a lot too. I'm not going to take up much of your time with my amazing pitch. All right, here we go. HEMA. So HEMA as a martial art means historical European martial arts. Now, I have a confession to make. When I first heard about HEMA many years ago, I remember I was in Vancouver and there was some guy who told me like, oh yeah, because he knew I was into weapons fighting, Filipino martial arts. I was doing Ilustrísimo at the time. He said, go check out HEMA. You might like it. And I went online and I looked up what HEMA was and I was immediately turned off. And this is a big lesson for me because that experience, I think, is the experience many martial artists have with HEMA. But when you deep dive into it, HEMA is actually very badass. Now, it's kind of a dichotomy. So let me explain the dichotomy of HEMA. I don't even know if dichotomy is the right word, but I'm using it. It's kind of split into these two worlds. When you hear historical European martial arts, what immediately comes to mind for me is people kind of LARPing, cosplaying, putting on knight's armor and being like, oh, we're tough guys and like play fighting. Now, HEMA actually tries to take a lot of its techniques and a lot of its system from these old manuscripts. And they look at the manuscripts, they analyze the manuscripts, but here's the most important part. They then go take those techniques and they pressure test the hell out of them, full force. Now, I didn't know this. When you start looking at this, deep dive into it, it's really interesting. Now, because of that, there's like a two-body division of HEMA from what I tend to see. There's the people who love the historical element, the manuscripts and deep diving into it and analyzing every movement, every picture, every this, every that. Those aren't the kind of people who are going to go fight. And you have these other group who just like to fight. They're more like me. They like to go pressure test. They like to put on some gear and go hash it out. And so HEMA has this division from what I understand within it. Now, there's certain criticisms of HEMA, even from people within HEMA. And I'm going to discuss those later, but let's just start jumping in right away. Now, one of the main things I noticed about HEMA, which I thought for a weapons-based system was amazing, is the range at which they're willing to fight. They're willing to get close. They're willing to grapple with each other, wrestle each other, even with these long swords, these rapiers, and take the fight to the ground. Now, as much flack as HEMA gets, other weapons-based systems don't allow that too commonly. You look at modern-day fencing. You look at Kendo, which gets a ton of respect. Everyone thinks you're badass if you do Kendo because it's like a samurai martial art. You look at Filipino martial arts. A lot of these don't really focus on takedowns. So let's just look at this right here. And these guys are getting right into close range and taking the person down. Now, yes, they're both holding weapons, but what you don't realize in this training is you will actually become incredibly effective at taking down an armed person. It's harder to take someone down when you're holding a weapon than when you're not holding a weapon. These guys are actually training a surprisingly modern day effective skill, which is closing in extremely fast against an armed assailant who is trained and then taking them down to the ground. You could dismiss this all you want, but it's something that's sorely lacking in a lot of other weapons-based systems. And on that note, again, I don't understand why we look at something like Kendo or Aido, Kenjutsu, and say, oh, this is Japanese samurais. This is so cool. Or Filipino martial arts, and we go, oh, these are machete-based systems. That's so cool. That's so tough. But then we look at something like HEMA, and because it has the word historical in it, we dismiss the fact that they're actually training very hard and doing a ton of pressure testing and sparring. Now, this is a branding issue because me looking from the outside in at HEMA did not know that they do this kind of thing. And I'd imagine that a lot of other martial artists don't know this too, that they just hear about HEMA and they hear the historical, the manuscripts, the kind of, you see everyone wearing mustaches and dressing in old school garb. And that kind of right away turns off a lot of people. and it's just fascinating because I was totally surprised when I started deep diving into this at all this other stuff that is in the system that I wouldn't have thought about. Now, HEMA itself encompasses such a wide range of things that it's impossible to classify it or categorize it into one little category, like saying it's a rapier style, it's a longsword style. No, they wrestle, they use daggers, they do empty hand stuff, and we're going to try and look at a lot of those different things and see if they're actually practical or effective. But again, it's very rare you see a weapons-based system, especially a long-range weapons-based system. These are long swords, broadswords, being used in such close range and being tested in grappling range. So kudos to HEMA, guys. I just want to throw that out right away. That's a surprisingly effective skill for modern day fighting. Over here, I just had to show this video. We look at like modern day fighting, MMA, combat sports, and we go like, these are gladiators. These are actually probably what old school, knights in fighting armor and all these events actually look like. When you look at like people gathering and watching people fight to the death, this is what it probably resembled much more than what we do in MMA. And actually, if you listen to the sound of the metal clacking, I'm going to take it there. Let's just get ahead of it. That's metal on metal, steel on steel. Now, you can underestimate that. And you can say, oh, that's not a big deal. They're protected. But you know what? I'm going to show you a video right now that completely breaks that narrative, because these dudes knock each other out here. And, I'm going to show you the effectiveness of a metal shield cracking your head. And this guy's unconscious. He's out. His arm starts flailing after this. I mean, you could break somebody's arm through the armor. People grossly underestimate these kind of weapons. Now, look, am I going to walk around with a shield and a sword in modern day self-defense? No. But again, I'm also probably not going to walk around with a samurai sword, and you don't hear people make that argument for kendo. Additionally, anytime you're training with a long weapon like that, you're also learning how to use a stick. You're learning how to use a broom handle. You're learning how to use a myriad of weapons if you're creative and aware of what you're actually training with. And so that's not a fault of the system. Again, not every system, and I've said this almost every video because everyone always says, well, prove it in the ring. Number one, these guys are getting into rings and beating each other up with those actual weapons. So they are proving it in the ring. That is literally what they're doing. But the other argument people make is, well, I'm never going to walk around with that. I'm never going to have a sword on me. Two things here. Number one, it's not hard to get a sword. It's really not hard. You can go on Amazon. You can go on eBay. You can buy a sword anywhere. In fact, swords are probably the most accessible. Machetes are probably, any type of bladed long sword is probably one of the more accessible weapons worldwide, especially in poor countries, machetes. And it's much harder actually to get ammunition and get a firearm. Additionally, if we are looking at an end of the world event, having some kind of sword, whether that's a machete, whether that's a rapier, whatever that thing is, even just hanging in your house, is a great survival tool. You're not always going to be able to use your gun, especially in an end of the world type of event. And God forbid you run out of ammo. Having a sword is an amazing, amazing tool for survival. So people grossly underestimate that too. And again, I'm guilty of that. I was always like growing up in martial arts, I'm like, it's way cooler to be an empty hand martial artist. But no, it's very important to also know how to use weapons and know how to defend against weapons. Now, I hear a lot of people complain about the quality, and I'm putting this here, the quality of fighter in HEMA. I feel like these guys are incredibly fast and have beautiful movement. So these guys do not look like they're terrible fighters with weapons. To me, they actually look like they train quite hard and quite nimble, quite agile and beautiful. In fact, one of the things I really love about this is it almost feels, in many ways, a little bit Illustrissimo-ish from my background, that I see they slip their body out of way just enough to catch you over the top or to catch you underneath. You look at the ghost step in Illustrissimo, it's a very similar concept. So these guys have, there's a lot in Filipino martial arts that comes from traditional fencing systems. If you look at some of the bladed, longer systems in Filipino martial arts, and when we look at them in Filipino martial arts, we say, oh, that's so cool. But then we look at it in HEMA and we make fun of it. Again, I'm totally confused by this, and I'm guilty of it. So I'm still trying to figure out what my problem is. Another thing that's really nice here is, again, they're willing to close in on each other incredibly fast. This was the thing that surprised me the most. They also use another principle, which you see very commonly in Filipino martial arts, which is attacking the extremities. They attack the hand and they attack the leg. And there he baited him. He moved his body back and hit the head to drive the far target close. These are great principles, not just great weapons-based principles, by the way, great principles for fighting. You look at great boxers, great strikers, they use this same principle. They drive in just enough to bait you to strike them, then they're out of the way and they're countering you over the top. This is a very common way to fight empty hand too. And so to believe that these movements and this type of training does not benefit you empty hand is very naive. It increases your reflex time, it increases your counters, it increases your footwork. Now, is it the best thing you could be doing for empty hand self-defense? By no means is it the best thing you can be doing. But again, their empty hand is all right. It reminds me of like a weird mix of taijutsu from Nimpo and a little bit of sistema in there with some kind of like weird empty hand boxing. And again, I can't base it entirely on this video because the whole premise here of HEMA, and maybe this is the biggest knock on HEMA, is that it's kind of anything you want it to be so long as you base it on some of these ancient manuscripts. Everyone kind of goes off in their own field. And again, like I said, there's this category. There's two categories of people. There's the manuscript people and there's the fighting people who want to spar. And it seems like there's a division there. And so, you know, people go in either direction and kind of go into hyper theoretical or hyper spar based. And the argument I guess people make is, well, when you go into that hyper evolved modern day spar based sport style, that you're losing the historical style. I disagree with this. I think so long as you train with the historical weapons and you keep that alive and you dress up and you get protective gear and you pressure test, you're actually honoring the way people fought back in the day far more, because that's what they did. They pressure tested. They needed it in warfare. And again, here's a video of Kendo versus HEMA. I think that's a long sword. It's very interesting to see the different approach. But it's not like the HEMA guy's like completely outmatched against this Kendo guy. He just has a completely different style of fighting. And so, again, it's just totally unexpected to me. I thought I would hate HEMA when I came into making this video, and people have been asking me to do it for a while. I think something that kind of opened my eyes to these older systems, these older weapon-based systems, is when I was in Portugal. I did the Jogo do Pau training up in the mountains with those villagers. And so Jogo do Pau, if you don't know, is a long staff system of fighting that was created as a way for villages to protect themselves. And they used staffs because they didn't have money to have swords. It was hard to get the swords back then, the materials to make swords. And so it was a way to train populations that if you did give them a spear, which would be cheap down the road, that they would already know how to use it, because all these weapons are transitionary. When you learn how to use a stick, you learn how to use a spear, you learn how to use a sword. It's all the same thing, which is why you're able to see these styles kind of fight against each other. Another thing, again, that HEMA has, which a lot of systems don't, is they just skirmish, like multiple people fighting each other at the same time, which is super badass. I mean, you just don't see this in other weapons-based systems. And this is super entertaining to me. This is like way more entertaining than watching a Brazilian jiu-jitsu match. Seeing a bunch of dudes dressed up in armor crack each other with full steel weapons that actually knock each other out. There's a guy who's unconscious on the side right there. It's like, that's pretty crazy. I think there's like two guys who are down and out. Like, these dudes are actually full on attacking each other. And again, we look at this like it's a punk style, but this is like a badass tough guy style. And again, it gets no respect for it. Branding issue for sure. It's just chopping at that guy's head with like a metal sword. It's nuts. It's absolutely bonkers to me. It would be super cool to see HEMA become a modern day combat sport and have kind of a unified rule set and brand certain fighters so that you got attached to certain fighters and you're like, this guy's the longsword expert. He's fighting the longsword expert from this team. And you have different events that culminate point-wise up to like a winning team with the skirmish maybe being the final thing. So like start off the day with rapier, then go to like dagger fighting. There's an empty hand and wrestling element, because people don't realize that HEMA is anything historically European that is a martial art. Folk wrestling is part of that. Empty hand fighting is part of that. And so you could create a crazy modern day combat sporting event around this. It's interesting to me that every modern day combat sport is kind of the same thing, even when they try and change it. MMA, karate combat, bare knuckle fighting, 1FC, where they have the small glove Muay Thai. They're all very similar. There's nothing that's like totally outside the box and different that you look at and you go, oh man, that's a totally different sporting event in the combat sports world. HEMA fits that category. You could do a HEMA event and have it like an MMA style event, and it would be huge, I believe. Just need to brand it right. And look at this. Look at this beautiful takedown that's coming. Sick. You're going to tell me that doesn't teach you to be a better self-defense expert? Being able to drive in like that? That guy's out. He hurt that guy's back. Slamming someone like that on the concrete, by the way, will end a fight. And here's actually, if this is it, if this is the video, might be my favorite. They're just showing where the guy gets caught on the arm. See a lot of extremity fighting on the arms, very similar to Filipino martial arts. Yeah, this is the video. I'm going to show you guys my favorite weapon that I discovered when doing this video, and it's Polish saber fighting. It is badass. This is not it. This I like to show you guys because, again, it shows how they drive in so close to each other, which is just something I wasn't expecting. And they have really nice counters in close. I don't know if you guys saw it, but he actually hit him in the leg there. I think they're going to show it now. But look at this exchange. Look where he catches him. Right in the leg. You saw that? Crazy. Let's look at Polish saber fighting. Look at the speed of that weapon. This reminds me also, again, of in Dose Paris, we do a move called Balitok, which is like whipping up top to hit both sides of the head. This, if I just watched it, I think these are like Persian sword fighting, but apparently it's Polish saber fighting. And really beautiful. Really beautiful and really cool. And they wait for like that opening, and then they like slice at each other's body or head. But these guys are moving fast. Again, like I said, the reaction timing, it's a nice weapon-based system. I don't think I would personally put on all the armor, so this appeals to me more. I like being nimble, and again, we're looking at applying it to modern day kind of practicality. I like, even in my empty hand, wearing as little protective gear as possible, which is why styles like Kyokushin appeal to me so much. And even in Filipino martial arts, I would only put on a headgear when I would spar in Filipino martial arts. I wasn't the type of person, I'm turned off by Wekaf, with the full body armor. I've shown it in the past. I like just putting on a headgear, and then I could feel and I can move properly, and it feels more reality-based. Either way, big surprise for me. Now, like I said, even HEMA guys complain about where HEMA is going. They complain about the quality of fighter in HEMA. They complain that it loses the historical edge to evolve into a modern-day combat sport. And I think, again, this is true of any modern-day fighting system. Every system of martial arts, to some extent, pulls from what we have learned from our ancestors. It's naive to think otherwise. You look at modern-day Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, stemming from Judo, stemming from Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, and it just goes back more and more and more, and these moves evolve over time. But these people who fought wars in the day had to be effective at what they were doing. That was their lives. There were populations of people who had to be effective at protecting their villages, their cities, their countries, and would go out and die very easily to do this. And so we've kind of come into this kind of modern day entitlement or modern day delusion that everything they did is just useless, and all that matters now is MMA and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because it doesn't fit our modern day times. We don't walk around with those swords. We're not fighting wars in the same way. We have guns, we have missiles. But to dismiss that entire part of fighting as being ineffective is, to me, again, completely naive. Now, I'll end on this note one more time. I don't think if you came to me and you said, hey, is this a system I should learn to be street effective in modern day times? My answer would be like, no, there's much better street effective systems. But if you came to me and you said, I want a really cool weapons-based system, thinking of buying a sword, I want to learn a whole variety of things, I want to know how to fight in close, and I love these older styles, this is fantastic. And I just had no idea that they pressure test so much. I wish they branded better. I wish they kind of embraced evolving a lot more. And it seems like that's happening because there's so many sparring videos. One of the main complaints I always hear is you don't pressure test. You don't pressure test. These guys are pressure testing tremendously, more than most other systems I've seen. So from what I've researched. And so again, it just needs a kind of unified body to brand it, market it, and put it together right, get it out there, and get you attached to fighters and people. And then they could have a really cool sport aspect. And again, I don't think that detracts from what HEMA is. I hope that people hear that and understand that. I think you need the sport aspect. It's cohesive. This dichotomy that exists between the manuscripts and the modern day fighting. And people say, well, that's not in the manuscript. That's not in the manuscript. People are taking one of the best ways to make a style effective is to take stuff that you see and then go test it and see if it works against a resisting person. And so whoever's on the manuscript side should not be upset with the people actually saying, well, let's go out there and see if it works. We're still using these weapons. Well, hey, my body moved differently this time. I cut over here and that's not in a manuscript, or I went for a double leg and that wasn't in the manuscript. Who cares? That's the evolution of these systems. And that's exactly what these ancient warriors would have wanted you to do anyway. Hope you like this video. I'm, again, new to this whole HEMA thing. I don't think it's cosplay anymore, just a little bit. And I really like it. Really, really surprised by it. I hope that they do more empty hand dagger stuff. I think that that's like a modern day practical, very practical weapon because so many people walk around with smaller knives. But overall, pleasantly surprised, really enjoyed it. Hopefully I can find a HEMA school and shoot you guys a video over there and I'll get dressed up like a knight and fight full force for you guys because that would be awesome. Like and subscribe, leave your opinions down below, and thank you again for watching.